The street was eerily silent, the kind of silence that feels unnatural in a city that never sleeps. Red and blue lights flashed against the brick walls of the old apartment complex, casting long shadows over the pavement. The air was thick with tension as officers moved carefully around the scene, speaking in hushed voices. It was supposed to be a routine call, a disturbance reported by a neighbor. But now, it had turned into something much darker. In the midst of the commotion, a single figure stood frozen, his dark eyes locked onto something just beyond the police tape. He wasn't an officer, at least not in the way most people think of them. He had no badge pinned to his uniform, no gun at his hip, but his presence commanded just as much respect, if not more. His name was Max, a highly trained canine, and tonight, he was acting strangely. Max had been with the force for years, a loyal partner to Officer Daniels. Together, they had chased down criminals, uncovered hidden evidence, and even saved lives. But in all their time together, Daniels had never seen his partner like this. Max refused to move from the edge of the crime scene, his body tense, his ears perked forward. The dog's breathing was heavy, his muscles stiff. He wasn't just alert, he was anxious. And Max was never anxious. Daniels knelt beside him, resting a hand on the German shepherd's back. "Come on, buddy. Let's go," he said softly. But Max didn't budge. Instead, he let out a low whine, his nose twitching as he sniffed the cold night air. He took a step forward, his paws brushing against the edge of the sidewalk, his gaze fixed on something beyond the yellow tape. The officers exchanged glances. "Something's not right," one of them murmured. They had already secured the scene, checked the perimeter, searched the apartment, questioned witnesses. Everything should have been accounted for. And yet, Max wouldn't leave. It was as if he knew something they didn't. Daniels hesitated, feeling a chill creep down his spine. He had learned long ago to trust his partner's instincts. If Max was acting this way, there had to be a reason. Taking a deep breath, Daniels turned to his fellow officers. "We need to check again," he said, his voice firm. "Max is onto something." Some of the officers sighed, exhausted from the long night, but they knew better than to argue. They had seen firsthand what Max was capable of. If the dog said there was something here, then there was something here. The search started again. Flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating every shadowy corner. Officers moved carefully, checking places they had already searched, looking for anything they might have missed. But Max wasn't focused on the apartment or the alleyway behind it. His eyes were fixed on a specific spot near the base of a tall wooden fence. Daniels followed his partner's gaze, his heart pounding. The ground looked undisturbed, nothing out of place. But Max's body tensed even more, his nails scratching against the pavement as he let out another whine. Then, without warning, he lunged forward, his paws digging at the dirt with frantic urgency. Daniel's breath caught. "Hold up," he said, waving the others over. He knelt down, brushing away the loose soil Max had disturbed. And that's when he saw it. A single glint of something metallic, barely visible beneath the dirt. Daniels reached for it cautiously, his fingers brushing against something cold. As he lifted it, the weight of the object sent a jolt of realization through him. It was a key, but not just any key. And at that moment, Max let out a sharp bark, his ears pinned back, his body pressed protectively against his handler's leg. It was clear whatever this key unlocked, it was something that someone wanted to keep buried. Daniels glanced at his team, his pulse racing. They weren't finished here, not even close. And what they were about to uncover, it was bigger than anyone had imagined. Daniels turned the key over in his hand, his brow furrowed. It was old, worn down at the edges, the kind of key that belonged to something important, something meant to stay locked. He looked at Max, who was still tense, his dark eyes shifting between the officers and the fence. Whatever the dog had found, he wasn't ready to move on. He was waiting, watching like he knew there was more. One of the other officers, Martinez, crouched beside him, her flashlight casting a glow over the disturbed dirt. "That wasn't here before," she murmured. "We swept this area already. Someone must have tried to hide it recently." Daniels nodded, his mind racing. The crime scene itself had been puzzling from the start. There were no clear signs of forced entry in the apartment, No obvious motive for the disturbance call. The neighbor who had called it in reported hearing voices, raised, urgent, but by the time officers arrived, the place was eerily empty. No suspect, no victim, just an overturned coffee table and a single broken lamp. It didn't add up. And now, with Max uncovering something new, it felt like they had only scratched the surface. "Think it belongs to the apartment?" Martinez asked, nodding at the key. Daniels weighed it in his palm. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe it's for something else." Max whined softly, shifting on his paws, his gaze flicking back to the wooden fence. Daniels followed his eyes. Beyond the fence was a narrow alleyway, dark and quiet. The officers had checked it earlier, but it had been empty. Now, though, Daniels felt something gnawing at him, a sense that they had missed something. He stood, slipping the key into his pocket. "Let's take another look." The group moved carefully, stepping over uneven pavement as they entered the alley. The air was damp, carrying the scent of old rain and city grime. Max stayed close to Daniel's side, his movements sharp and deliberate, his ears flicking at the smallest sound. Daniel's flashlight swept over the brick walls, catching faded graffiti and rusted drainpipes. Nothing unusual. But then Max stopped again, his nose twitching as he let out a soft growl. Martinez tensed. "He's onto something?" Daniels nodded, gripping the flashlight tighter. He moved toward the spot where Max had stopped, a small, metal door set low into the brick wall. It was easy to overlook, blending into the grime of the alley. There was no sign of a handle, just a keyhole. His fingers brushed against the key in his pocket. His heart pounded. It couldn't be that simple. He exchanged glances with Martinez. "This might be it." She took a step back, scanning their surroundings. "If someone hid that key, they didn't want us finding this door." Daniels exhaled sharply. He knew she was right, but there was no turning back now. He pulled out the key and slid it into the lock. It fit perfectly. The metal door groaned as he turned the key, the sound echoing through the alley. Slowly, he pushed it open, revealing a narrow, pitch-black corridor. A rush of stale air met them, thick with dust and something else, something harder to define. Max took a cautious step forward, sniffing at the entrance. His ears twitched, and then, without hesitation, he moved inside. Daniels glanced at Martinez, then back at the others. "Stay close," he said. The group stepped into the darkness, their flashlights cutting through the shadows. The corridor was tight, lined with exposed pipes and crumbling bricks. The deeper they moved, the colder it got, the air pressing in around them. Then Max stopped again. This time he didn't growl. He didn't move at all. Daniels aimed his flashlight ahead, and his breath caught. A door. Another one. This one wasn't like the first. It was sturdier, reinforced with metal plates. There were scratches near the handle, deep and uneven, like someone had tried to claw their way inside. Martinez whispered, "What the hell is this place?" Daniels didn't answer. He reached for the handle, testing it. Locked. Max let out a sharp bark, startling them all. The sound echoed through the corridor, bouncing off the walls. It wasn't a warning bark. It was urgent, insistent. Daniels pressed his ear against the door. At first, there was nothing, just silence. But then, a noise. Faint, almost imperceptible. A shuffle. Someone was inside. Daniels took a step back, heart hammering. He signaled to Martinez, who had already reached for a radio. "This is Officer Martinez, requesting backup at..." A loud thud cut her off. Something had slammed against the other side of the door. Max went rigid, his body lowering into a defensive stance. Daniels barely had time to process what was happening before another sound followed. This one wasn't a thud. It was a voice. Weak. Strained. "Help!" The single word was muffled, barely more than a whisper. But it was enough. Daniels didn't hesitate. "We need that door open. Now!" Martinez relayed their position, calling for assistance. The others moved quickly, assessing the door, trying to find a way in. But the lock was solid, the hinges reinforced. Whoever had built this place had wanted to keep people out. Or maybe keep someone in? Daniel's pulse raced. They weren't dealing with an ordinary crime scene. This was something else. Something bigger. Max let out another sharp bark, pressing closer to the door, his nails scraping against the floor. He wasn't just trying to alert them anymore. He was desperate. And that terrified Daniels more than anything else. Because if Max was this anxious, then whatever was behind that door, it wasn't just a mystery. It was a nightmare waiting to be uncovered. Daniels pressed a hand against Max's back, steadying the dog as he listened for any more sounds from the other side of the door. His mind raced. The crime scene had been strange from the beginning, but this was something else entirely. Someone was trapped behind that door. And judging by the urgency in their voice, they didn't have much time. Martinez moved beside him, her jaw tight, as she spoke into the radio. "Dispatch, we need immediate backup at our location. Possible hostage situation. Requesting breach equipment." The radio crackled, and a voice responded. "Copy that. Units en route. ETA 7 minutes." Daniels exhaled sharply. 7 minutes. That was too long. Max let out another whine, his paws shifting restlessly. Daniels had worked with him long enough to know he wasn't just sensing danger. He was feeling something. Fear. Desperation. Whatever was behind that door wasn't just a crime to solve. It was someone's life hanging in the balance. His grip tightened around the flashlight as he turned to Martinez. "We're not waiting. We need to get in now." She hesitated, but only for a second. Then she nodded, stepping back to examine the door. "It's reinforced," she muttered. "We're not kicking it in." One of the other officers, Carter, ran a hand along the edge, feeling for any weak points. "If it's locked from the inside, maybe we can—" A sudden bang from behind the door cut him off. It wasn't a person this time. It was something heavier. A chair? A piece of furniture? Whatever it was, it sounded like someone inside was trying to block the entrance. Daniel's pulse quickened. "Hey," he called out, stepping closer. "We're with the police. We're here to help." Silence. Then, barely audible, ragged breathing. Martinez swallowed. "If they don't want us getting in, that means someone else does." Daniels clenched his jaw. She was right. Whoever was inside wasn't just trapped. They were hiding. Max's ears twitched, his body tense, but he didn't growl this time. Instead, he sniffed the bottom of the door, then turned his head slightly toward the left side of the corridor. Daniels followed the movement, his flashlight sweeping over the brick wall. It looked solid, but something about it felt off. Then he saw it, a faint outline near the floor, a thin gap in the bricks, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. His stomach twisted. "There's something behind this wall," he murmured. Martinez frowned, stepping closer. "Like what?" Daniels reached out, pressing his fingers along the edge. The bricks felt loose, too loose. His breath hitched as he pulled at one. It shifted slightly, dust crumbling away at the seams. And then another sound, not from behind the door, from inside the wall. Martinez's eyes widened. "No way." Carter grabbed a crowbar from his belt. "Move." Daniel stepped back as Carter wedged the metal between the bricks and pulled. The first one popped free with a low groan. Then another, and another. Behind the crumbling brick was something unexpected. A second hidden space. A narrow gap, almost like a passageway, only wide enough for a person to squeeze through. It was dark, cold. The air inside smelled stale, untouched. Daniels felt a chill run through him. "This isn't just a room," he whispered. "It's a hiding place." Martinez's grip tightened on her radio. "Someone built this deliberately." Carter aimed his flashlight inside. Dust swirled in the beam, revealing faint footprints in the dirt-covered floor. The passage didn't go far, just a few feet before ending at another wall. But something was back there, a shape barely visible in the darkness. Daniel stepped forward carefully. "Hello." A shaky breath. Then movement. Max tensed but didn't bark. He stayed close, his head low, his body still. He wasn't reacting like he would to a threat. This wasn't an attacker. This was someone scared. Daniels took another step, his heart pounding. "It's okay," he said, his voice softer now. "We're not here to hurt you." A pause. Then, finally, the shape in the darkness shifted forward. A girl. She looked no older than 16, her face streaked with dirt, her clothes wrinkled as if she'd been hiding for days. Her hands trembled as she pressed herself against the brick, her wide eyes darting between them and the door. Daniels froze. She wasn't just hiding from whoever was behind that locked door. She was hiding from what was coming next. Martinez inhaled sharply. "Oh my God!" Daniels knelt slowly, keeping his hands where she could see them. "You're safe now," he said gently. "Can you tell me your name?" The girl's lips parted, but no words came out. Her body shook, as if she was too exhausted, too terrified to speak. Then, another noise. Not from the corridor. Not from the hidden space. From behind the door again. Only this time, it wasn't a bang. It was footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Someone had just entered the room on the other side. And whoever it was, they weren't supposed to be there. Daniels barely breathed as the slow, deliberate footsteps echoed from the other side of the door. The girl's entire body went rigid, her fingers gripping the fabric of her dirty sweatshirt. Max let out a low, warning growl, his ears flat against his head. It was the kind of growl Daniels had only heard when real danger was near. Martinez shot him a look, her hand hovering near her holster. "Someone just came in?" Daniels gave a small nod, then turned back to the girl, keeping his voice low. "Is it the same person who locked you in here?" The girl swallowed hard, barely managing to shake her head. That made his stomach twist even more. If it wasn't who had trapped her, then who was it? Another step. Closer this time. Daniels felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. Whoever was on the other side of that door wasn't in a hurry. They weren't searching or calling out. They were just there, listening, waiting. The air in the passageway felt tight, heavy with something unspoken. The girl looked like she wanted to disappear into the wall. Her hands clenched into fists, her breathing shallow. Daniels could see it in her eyes. She knew exactly who was in that room, and she was terrified of them. He leaned in slightly. "How many?" She hesitated. Then, in the faintest whisper, one person, one unknown presence. But the way she said it made it sound worse than if she had said many. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. They were running out of time. Backup was still minutes away, but he had a gut feeling they couldn't afford to wait. Not if they wanted to keep her safe. He turned to Carter and Martinez, keeping his voice barely above a whisper. "We go in fast. No warnings. Max stays with her." Martinez gave a tight nod. Carter checked his weapon, his jaw set. No one needed to say what they were all thinking. This could go very, very bad. Another sound from behind the door. Not a step this time. A quiet, deliberate click. The sound of a latch being locked from the inside. Daniel's heartbeat nearly stopped. They were being sealed out. Or worse, whoever was in there was making sure the girl couldn't leave. Daniels didn't wait another second. "Go!" Carter moved first, ramming his shoulder into the reinforced door. It held for a second, then groaned against the force. Another hit. The wood cracked at the hinges. Then, something unexpected. A voice. Low, calm, and chilling in its stillness. "You shouldn't be here." The girl let out a quiet, panicked breath, her arms wrapping around herself. Daniels barely had time to register the fear in her face before Carter slammed into the door a third time. And it burst open. The room was dimly lit, a single exposed bulb swaying from the ceiling. The air was thick, musty. A single wooden chair sat in the middle of the room, facing the door. Empty. Daniel's blood ran cold. No one was there, but the air still felt occupied. Martinez moved in fast, sweeping the room with her weapon raised. Carter checked the corners, his movements sharp and precise. Nothing. And yet, something felt wrong. Daniels could feel it, like the weight of unseen eyes pressing against his skin. He turned in a slow circle, scanning the room, trying to make sense of what he was feeling. Then he noticed something. The chair. It wasn't just placed there. It was angled, slightly turned, facing, not the door, but a second wall. A blank wall. A watching wall. Daniel's stomach dropped. He moved toward it carefully, his flashlight tracing along the surface. At first, it looked like nothing but cracked paint and old cement. But then he saw it. The smallest, nearly invisible slit. A panel. A hidden compartment. He reached out slowly, his fingers pressing against the edge. The wall moved. It wasn't a solid structure. It was a door. A door leading to somewhere else. Martinez's breath hitched. Daniels, He nodded grimly. I see it. They had been focused on the girl, on the idea of a locked room, of someone breaking in. But what if the real danger had never left at all? A shadow of movement flickered just beyond the panel. Someone was still there, watching, waiting, and they had just let the officers walk right in. Daniels barely had time to react before the air shifted. A soft creak, so quiet it could have been imagined, echoed from behind the false wall. His pulse pounded as he turned his head just slightly, enough to catch the briefest flicker of movement in the shadows. Someone was there, still, watching, waiting. Martinez tense beside him, her fingers tightening around her weapon. Carter took a slow step forward, his flashlight beam skimming across the hidden panel, illuminating the fine dust in the air. The girl in the passage behind them whimpered softly, pressing herself against the wall. Max stood rigid at her side, his ears pricked forward, his body coiled like a spring. He knew. He felt it. Daniels exhaled sharply, keeping his voice low. Come out. Now. Silence. Then tap. A single, deliberate knock from behind the wall. Daniels' stomach clenched. That wasn't an accident. That wasn't someone panicking or trying to escape. It was a message. Martinez swallowed hard. What the hell was that? Carter adjusted his grip on the crowbar, muscles tense. We opening it? Daniels hesitated for half a second, long enough to hear something even worse. A second sound, not from the hidden compartment, from the doorway behind them. The door they had just broken through, the one that had been locked from the inside, was now slowly, softly closing. Daniel spun around, flashlight sweeping across the room. But there was no one there. No footsteps. No motion. Nothing. Just the heavy, suffocating realization that whoever had been in this room hadn't left through that hidden door. They had never left at all. Max suddenly let out a sharp, frantic bark. The girl gasped, shrinking back, her hands covering her ears. And then, the light bulb above them flickered. Once. Twice. Then everything plunged into darkness. The room was swallowed in an instant. The only sound was the girl's quick, uneven breathing and the barely restrained growl coming from Max. Daniels moved fast, reaching for his backup flashlight, clicking it on. The beam cut through the dark, landing right where the hidden panel had been, but it was open now. The slit in the wall was empty. The space beyond was deep, black, stretching into the unknown. Whoever had been inside was gone. A rush of movement behind him. Martinez pivoting, Carter shifting toward the door, scanning for any sign of who had shut it. Daniel's heart pounded. They had lost control. They had never had control. And then, a whisper. So soft, so faint it barely reached them. Too late. Daniel's blood turned ice cold. Carter swore under his breath, taking another step toward the door. But before anyone could react, a deafening slam echoed through the space. The hidden panel snapped shut. A rush of air, as if something had just moved fast through the darkness. Then silence. The room was still again. The only proof that anything had happened was the shallow, shaky breath of the girl still pressed against the wall. Daniels exhaled sharply, forcing himself to think. The person who had been behind that wall was gone. But they weren't alone in here. He turned to Martinez, speaking fast. We need to get her out. Now. Martinez nodded, already moving toward the girl, keeping her gun ready. Carter yanked the door back open, checking the hallway, scanning for any signs of movement. It was empty, but the air still felt wrong. Daniels grabbed his radio. Dispatch, we need backup now. There's someone in this building, possibly armed. We are not alone. The radio crackled. Units en route. 3 minutes out. 3 minutes. A lifetime. Daniels turned back to the hidden panel, jaw clenched. Someone had been there, right there, watching them, messing with them, and then they were gone, slipping away like a ghost in the dark. But ghosts didn't whisper, and ghosts didn't lock doors from the inside, which meant someone was still out there, still watching, and they weren't finished yet. Daniel's grip tightened around his flashlight as he took one last look at the hidden panel. The cold weight of reality settled in. Whoever had been inside was gone, and they had let the officers come so close before slipping away. The eerie whisper still echoed in his mind. Too late. But too late for what? Martinez helped the girl to her feet, speaking to her in soft, reassuring tones. Her hands were shaking, but she let Martinez guide her, her wide, frightened eyes flickering between the officers. She wanted to run, to escape, but something was holding her back. Something more than just fear. Daniels knelt in front of her, keeping his voice steady. You're safe now. But we need to know. Who was that? Who locked you in here? The girl swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know his name. Daniels studied her carefully. But you've seen him before? She hesitated, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I was hiding from him. A rush of footsteps echoed from the hallway. For a second, Daniel's pulse spiked, but then familiar voices filled the space. Backup had arrived. Officers flooded in, weapons raised, moving quickly to secure the scene. The tension in the air lifted slightly, but Daniels knew the real danger had already vanished into the shadows. Chief Reynolds strode in, his sharp gaze sweeping the room. Report, Daniels exhaled. We found her hidden behind a false wall. Someone else was here, but they disappeared through a secondary passage before we could get to them. He motioned to the panel. They knew this place better than we did. Reynolds frowned, stepping closer. The building records didn't mention anything about hidden compartments. Daniels shook his head. Because they weren't meant to be found. One of the officers checked the false wall, running a gloved hand along the edges. This wasn't an old hiding spot. It's been used recently. Daniels looked back at the girl. How long were you in there? She shifted uncomfortably. A couple days, I think. Her voice wavered. I lost track. Martinez softened her tone. Did he put you in there? The girl hesitated again, then shook her head. I hid there myself. She looked down, her fingers twisting the fabric of her sweatshirt. He didn't know about it. Daniels exchanged a glance with Martinez. That changed things. The hidden space hadn't been built by whoever was after her. It had been her escape. But from what? He spoke carefully. Why was he after you? The girl hesitated, her breathing uneven. She looked at the floor, like she was debating whether to say anything at all. Then, finally, she spoke. Because I saw something I wasn't supposed to. Silence filled the air. Martinez crouched beside her. What did you see? The girl's fingers curled into fists. Him, she whispered. I saw him. Daniels felt a chill creep down his spine. Where? She swallowed hard. The old factory, near the bridge. Her eyes darted toward the hidden panel. He thought no one was watching. But I saw him. Reynolds stepped closer. What was he doing? The girl hesitated, then shook her head quickly. I don't know. But it was bad. And he knew I saw. Daniels felt the pieces clicking into place. She had witnessed something serious enough to make someone hunt her down. Martinez pressed gently. And that's why you ran? The girl nodded. I didn't know where to go. I kept moving. I thought maybe if I hid long enough, he'd stop looking. She squeezed her eyes shut. But he never did. Daniels exhaled slowly. She had been running for her life. And somehow, whoever was after her had gotten close. Too close. Reynolds straightened his jaw tight. We need a unit at that factory now. He turned to Carter. Get the security footage from every traffic camera near this location. If he was watching this building, we'll find out how he got in and where he went. Carter nodded, already on his radio. Martinez turned back to the girl, her voice kind but firm. You're coming with us? We're going to keep you safe. But we need you to tell us everything you remember. The girl hesitated, then nodded weakly. Okay. Daniels felt Max nudge his leg, his body finally relaxing. The tension in the room was lifting, but it wasn't over. Whoever had been hunting her was still out there, still watching. But now, they had something he didn't expect. A witness. Daniel stood, scanning the dimly lit room one last time. The shadows felt emptier now, the weight of unseen eyes finally lifting. But he couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, nearby, he was still lurking, waiting, and he wasn't done yet. As they escorted the girl out of the building, Max stayed close to her side, his presence steadying her. She reached down hesitantly, running her fingers through his fur. For the first time that night, she didn't look quite as scared. Daniels glanced down at Max, then back at the girl. They had found her in time. She was safe for now. But the real hunt was just beginning.